Hello and welcome to Books of Our Time, a show produced by the Massachusetts School of Law in Andover and the American College of History and Legal Studies in Salem, New Hampshire. My guest for today is an author of 5 books and a former reporter for the New York Times and Wall Street Journal, James S. Hirsch. The book we are discussing today is an authorized biography of perhaps in some respects the greatest baseball player of all time, Willie Mays, the life, the legend. I'm Professor Holly Vietzke. Welcome to the show, James.
Thank you for inviting me.
First off, I'd like to find out how this book came about, considering Willie Mays didn't trust many people, especially journalists, and didn't talk to many people.
Willie is a very private individual who has turned down many offers from authors and publishers over the years. I first tried to reach Willie in year 2000 through a friend of his, and Willie said no, he wasn't interested in working with someone about a book. And so I went and did something else, and basically every 2 years I would go back to Willie's friend and say, hey, can you call Willie and ask him if he'd be willing to meet with me? And Willie kept saying no, and finally on my 4th time in 2007, Willie's friend again went to Willie, said, hey, there's this author who would love to meet you. Will you speak to him? Finally Willie said yes. I got Willie's phone number, I called him up. Willie said, well, come on by. Now, I live in the Boston area, and Willie lives in California. He didn't really understand that, I was 3,000 miles away. But I got on the plane, I met Willie and his home in the Bay Area. And basically, I said to Willie that, now is the time to cooperate on a book about your legacy, both on and off the field. Willie was 77 years old at the time. I said, if you don't do it now, someone else will do it years from now, when your point of view will not be front and center. And so we just started talking about it, and Willie gradually came around to trust me and understand why this would be a project worth doing.
And was he very amenable to everything?
Yeah, well, the thing about Willie is that he's very proud about the life that he's led. And when I spoke to him about the book, I said, basically, you have to look at the totality of your life, the positives as well as the negatives. And at the end of the day, what does the balance say? And if you're happy with that, we should go forward on this book, because the book is not going to be a Valentine to Willie Mays. It's going to tell the good, the bad, and the ugly. And when I put it in that context, as I said, Willie is extremely proud of how he led his life, not just as a player, but as a person off the field. Willie was born in the Deep South in Alabama in the 1930s, where blacks were second, third-class citizens. And then from where he started to where he became now, an American icon, he's very mindful of the trajectory of that life and the opportunity to talk about it and have other people talk about it and to put it all together into one framework that appealed to him.
Now, speaking of the Deep South in the 30s and 40s, segregation was very much alive and prevalent then. Yet Mays says that he was largely unaffected by, or at least as he said it, happily insulated from any racial tensions.
Right.
Why?
Willie grew up in a town of Fairfield, which is outside of Birmingham. Fairfield was a planned community, didn't have quite as many of the overt racial tensions that Birmingham had. The blacks and whites worked together in the steel mills down there. But most importantly for Willie was that he was a great athlete from the day he could start crawling, and he played sports with the other kids, the white kids as well as the black kids, football, baseball, basketball, and the white kids wanted Willie on their team. I mean, they weren't stupid. They wanted Willie Mays to be on their team. And so he got along with those kids. And so the combination of sports being this kind of great incubator of kids getting along, as well as the adults in Willie's life. Willie's father, the aunts who raised him, and others always said to Willie, your job is to stay out of trouble, keep your head down, and try to get along with whites. There's nothing to be gained for a black person in Alabama to running afoul of whites. So Willie made an effort to always stay clear of trouble, and because of that, I think he did feel insulated from those racial tensions.
And why does he say that life wasn't too hard for him?
Because he was such a great athlete. The adults that surrounded him insulated Willie from a lot of other things. So Willie didn't have to do quite as much as others in terms of like getting a job after school when he was in high school. Willie's father just said, "You focus on sports." Everyone knew at a young age that Willie's ticket out of Alabama, out of a life that really had very few opportunities for blacks at that time. Basically blacks worked in the steel mills or they had some other menial jobs. Willie's ticket out of that life was sports, and that's what Willie loved. And because of that, life was not as hard for him as it may have been for others in his peer group.
What did his father do when he caught Mays smoking and drinking on the street corner?
Well, from the get-go, Willie's father told him, "You cannot smoke or drink because they'll harm your body, and you have to have a healthy body if you're going to do well in sports." So one day when Willie was like 11 or 12, his father caught Willie with another friend smoking on the street corner. So Willie's father brings him home, and he gets these White Owl cigars, and he lights one up for Willie and says, "Smoke it, boy." Willie smoked it and almost gagged when he did it. Then he got out some moonshine, and he said, "Boy, drink it." Willie drank it and threw up. And from then on, Willie never smoked or drank. And to this day, one of the things that Willie is most proud of is that he did steer clear of those kinds of vices, which he attributes to his durability in baseball.
How did breaking his arm help him in baseball?
When Willie was 11 years old, he was in a tree watching a high school football game. He fell asleep, and he fell out of the tree, and he broke his arm. This created a huge scare for Willie and his friends and family, because again, even at that age, everyone knew that Willie was destined to play sports. That if with this broken arm, he may not be able to throw the ball as well. But after the cast came off, remarkably, Willie could not only still throw the ball, but he could throw the ball harder. It somehow adjusted his throwing motion that actually proved to help Willie. So I think he was fortunate on that count.
Among many of his gifts, he had an exceptional hearing. How did that benefit him in baseball?
It benefited him in baseball because Willie got great jumps off of when the ball hit the bat. He got these great jumps on the ball. And Willie said a lot of that had to do with the sound of the ball hitting the bat. The crack gave him the information he needed to know how hard the ball was hit. And in talking to one of Willie's boyhood friends, he told me that even as a child, Willie had this gift. He said, you could be talking in a whisper on one side of the room, and Willie would hear it on the other side of the room. And Willie's friend said to me, his ears were a weapon, which I love.
Mays' friend Otis Tate also says that baseball wasn't even his best sport. What was and why?
Willie was, and Willie himself acknowledges this, that he was probably better in both football and basketball than baseball. Baseball was probably his third best sport, but Willie ended up sticking with baseball because that had the most economic opportunities. Even before the major leagues were integrated, the Negro Leagues gave blacks an opportunity to make decent money, at least by those, compared to other jobs. And so really good baseball players who were black could play in the Negro Leagues, and that offered them one economic opportunity. And then after the professional leagues, baseball, football, and basketball were integrated, baseball was still the best economic opportunity because in football, Willie played quarterback. And in the professional leagues, what became the NFL, they did not let blacks play quarterback. And the problem with basketball was that Willie would have had to have gone to college before he could get into the NBA. Willie graduated high school, but Willie didn't want to have to wait 4 years. He wanted to start making money immediately. So for those reasons, Willie became a baseball player.
Now, when he played basketball, he would intentionally stop scoring after he hit 20 points. Why?
Because if his team was up by a significant margin, which they often were, he didn't want to rub it in. Willie believed in sportsmanship. That's how he was taught. And so once he got 20 points or so, he stopped scoring because he didn't want to pile the lead on.
How did he become a center fielder?
He actually was a pitcher initially because he could throw the ball so hard. But his father, who was also a baseball player, he played semi-pros, he didn't like Willie pitching because he was afraid that if Willie hurt his arm, his career would be ended. And then one day when Willie was playing, when he was a teenager, and he was pitching, At the end of the game, after Willie got a hit and ran around the bases, he collapsed from exhaustion. And Willie's father thought that the combination of pitching with that hit contributed to that. So from then on, Willie's father said, no more pitching, you play in the field. And they sent him out to center field, and that's where he was for the rest of his career.
Let's talk about Mays growing up a little bit. He was raised by his aunt, his parents never married, and his mother died very young. Yet he still claims that she played a very important role in his life. Can you talk about that?
It's really one of the most interesting parts of Willie's life, I think, because so little of it was known until this book. Willie's mom was 16 when Willie was born. She wasn't married to Willie's father. Willie's mom decided that she couldn't raise Willie, so she gave Willie up as a baby to her two younger sisters. Willie was actually raised by two girls, 13 and 9. Willie's mother then got married to another man and had 10 children with this man and lived about 5 miles from where Willie was raised. Willie saw his mother on a regular basis, and Willie's mother, who was this tough country woman, loved Willie, did what she could for him, but there was always this specter of abandonment, that here Willie's mother gave Willie up and then had 10 children with this other man, and Willie was always on the outside of this other family with all of his half siblings. And I believe that part of what made Willie a great baseball player was that he was motivated to show that he was worthy to his mother and to the other adults around him, and just to kind of prove to his mom what his worth was. And I kind of had an appreciation for this because Willie eventually spoke about this. It's a very private subject that he doesn't open up to much, but he did with me, and I had a sense of the importance of Willie's mom, because when Willie needs a computer password at home, he'll sometimes use Annie, A-N-N-I-E. Willie's mother's name was Annie, and that signaled to me how important she was to him.
Wow. Now, even though they both played in the Negro Leagues, Mays and Satchel Paige faced each other, and in the major leagues actually, faced each other only one time. Why was that, and what happened in those encounters?
Well, of course, Satchel Paige was quite a bit older than Willie, and the one time they met, Willie was playing for the Birmingham Black Barons in 1948 as a 18-year-old kid. Satchel Paige was then 41 years old. He's playing for the Kansas City Monarchs. So he pitched to Willie. The first time up, Willie, who was this puppy, hits a double, and Paige was furious that this kid could do that off of him. Next time up, Willie steps into the box. Paige comes up to him and says, "Boy, I'm going to throw 3 fastballs, and you're going to sit back down." Sure enough, Paige throws 3 great fastballs, strikes Willie out. Willie goes back to the bench. Shortly thereafter, Paige was signed by the Cleveland Indians, and he played for them for a number of years. Willie got to the major leagues 3 years later, playing for the New York Giants. Giants are in the National League, the Indians are in the American League, so they never faced each other again in a game.
Explain how the Boston Braves could have had Mays.
A scout for the Boston Braves discovered Willie in 1949. However, he couldn't sign Willie then because you weren't allowed to sign a player until he was out of high school. So the scout followed Willie for a full year. They were going to sign Willie as soon as he graduated high school. But then, literally at the 11th hour, the Braves withdrew their interest. Why? Because a couple weeks earlier, the Braves made a trade with the Brooklyn Dodgers, and they traded for a player who happened to be black. And the Boston Braves decided they could not have 2 black players on their team or in their system at the same time. So they withdrew their interest in Willie Mays, didn't sign him, and it's really in some ways a great loss, not just for the Braves, but several years later the Braves signed Henry Aaron. And so Willie Mays and Henry Aaron could have been in the same outfield for 20 plus years. How great would that have been?
I know, and Clemente too at one point.
The Pittsburgh Pirates were also interested in Mays. A scout saw Willie play, and they wanted, and the scout was interested in Mays, but for the exact same reason, the Pirates were not ready at that time in the late 40s to sign a black player. The team passed on him. A few years later, they did sign Roberto Clemente, but again, Mays and Clemente could have been in the same outfield.
Is that also why the Red Sox didn't sign him when the scout proclaimed him the greatest player he ever saw?
The Red Sox had a scout down there, came back, said this was the greatest player he'd ever seen. The Red Sox owner, of course, as Sox fans know all too well, Tom Yawkey, did not want to have anything to do with a black player, and so they passed on Mays. The Red Sox, of course, were the last team in the major leagues to have a black player on their team, not until 1959. And one of the reasons why they were a poor team for so long, they missed out on this great pool of talent that so many of the other teams recognized and were able to take advantage of.
Now that Braves scout who lost out on Mays when his team wouldn't sign him helped him become a Giant. Why did he do that?
Well, he knew that this kid was destined for greatness, so he told another scout for the New York Giants, you've got to check out this player for the Birmingham Black Barons. The Giant scout was going to look at the Black Barons because they were interested in a first baseman, but the Brave scout said, no, the kid you got to keep your eye out on is the center fielder. And sure enough, as soon as the Giant scout went to Alabama and saw the team play, he realized Willie's greatness. He said Willie's hands reminded him of Joe Louis, the boxer, so incredibly big and fast and sure. And the Braves and the Giants did not miss out.
How many teams were interested in Mays?
Willie only got one offer, but there were only about 4 or 5 teams that even saw him play and knew about him. And what's striking is that by 1949, 1950 actually, Jackie Robinson had been signed in 1945, and by 1947, Robinson came into the league and was a star, and he was quickly followed by other great black players, Roy Campanella, Don Newcomb, Larry Doby. So everyone knew by 1950 that black players were good enough to star in the major leagues, but most major league teams were still unwilling to sign black players, not because they doubted their skill, but because there was still the belief that black players were bad for business. If you had a black player on the field, that would keep away your white fans. They didn't understand that, first of all fans cared about is whether your team won, and second of all, the black players were not just great players, but they were exciting, because they would lead the league in stolen bases. They could do things on the field, importing some of the style of the Negro leagues that the white teams were not doing. So one of the great contributions, in fact, that Willie Mays made to Major League Baseball when he came to the Giants in 1951, he was so popular among not just Giant fans, not just white fans, but he would go on the road, and he was a huge hit in opposing ballparks, white fans and black fans, because Willie Mays he may or may not have been the greatest player of all time, but he was surely the most exciting player of all time. And Willie's contribution was that once he came and everyone realized how popular he was, he erased those fears that black players would somehow keep away white fans, or that black players were an economic liability.
What did Willie do when his minor league manager told him he'd just been promoted to the major leagues?
Willie didn't want to go. He was afraid. Willie was 20 years old. He was hitting .477, playing for his AAA minor league team in Minneapolis. He was settled there. He had a girlfriend there. The fans loved him, and but the manager of the Giants, Leo Durocher, knew that this kid was ready to play in the major leagues, and so he calls Willie on the phone in the hotel room where Willie was staying at, and Durocher says, you got to come up here now, and Willie says, I'm not ready, I can't. Durocher says, what are you hitting? Willie says, .477. Durocher says, well, do you think you can hit 2 blankety blank 7 in the major leagues? Durocher was nothing if not profane, and Willie says, well, yeah, I think so. And then Durocher says, well, get your rear end up here right now. And Willie was on the plane that night.
And why were the Polo Grounds ideally suited for Mays? And conversely, why would he have been miscast, as you said, in other parks?
The Polo Grounds was a unique ballpark in its configuration. It was built like a shoehorn, in which center field was 500 plus feet away from home plate. The foul lines were short. It was like 200 plus feet, but you had this vast center field, just looked like acres of land out there. What made Willie such a great player was that he was not just extremely fast, but he was incredibly fast with the ball in the air. Buck O'Neill, the great Negro League legend, said Willie Mays may not have been the fastest player of all time, but he was the fastest player of all time when the ball was in the air. So Willie out in center field gave him the landscape that he needed to display this great speed as well as throwing arm. You know, when you're out 400 plus feet, Willie could unleash these majestic throws. And so that's why the Polo Grounds was really the perfect field for him to play. He also played a very shallow center field. So you had these base hits in the center field. Willie would charge the ball. If the ball got past Willie, it would roll forever, and the hitter would have an inside the park home run. So that made it exciting, just to look at Willie out there all by himself. It was fun for the fans to watch. So that's why it was really the perfect ballpark for him to play in.
Now, what happened when he moved to Candlestick Park?
It was a less perfect ballpark. Not only was it it was conventional in center field 400 feet away, so it didn't give Willie the room to roam, but Candlestick was most notorious for the wind, and the wind blew left to right. Willie was a right-handed pull hitter, and it was very, very difficult to hit home runs pulling the ball in Candlestick. So Willie said he had to adjust his swing and try to hit the ball to right field in order to hit home runs. And there is, I think, a lot of reason to believe that that the Candlestick cost Willie quite a few home runs, as opposed if he had played in a ballpark that didn't have those winds, or a ballpark that was just more inviting for a power hitter.
How did Willie get the nickname the Say Hey Kid, and how do people think he got it?
People assume Willie would go around saying, say hey, say hey. In fact, Willie never used that phrase. When Willie was a rookie, he had this kind of verbal tick, which he developed in the South, where in the South you didn't say hello so much as you would say hey. And so Willie would go around saying hey a lot. Willie was also terrible with names, so he would always say, instead of addressing someone by his or her name, he would just say, hey you, or hey, how you doing? So a sports writer at the time called him the Say Hey Kid. Literally, he did say hey, and he was a kid. And it was really the perfect nickname for him, not just because it was pithy and catchy, but it captured Willie's personality. Willie, particularly when he was young, was this very exuberant, outgoing, smiling kid. And the Say Hey Kid just captured that kind of enthusiasm. And it stuck with him for not just his entire career, but to this day, when he is introduced in front of audiences, he will still be introduced as the Say Hey Kid.
How did he come to use the basket catch?
It was something that he learned when he was in the Army, actually, where he played for the baseball team with his fort, and one of the guys who was on his team showed him how to catch the ball in that fashion. Willie loved it, in part because he thought it may give him a slight edge in being able to get to the ball more quickly when he had to throw it, when he was trying to throw a runner out who was tagging up. But the real reason Willie loved the basket catch is that Willie was a showman, first and foremost. He thought his job was to entertain the fans. And the basket catch was different than the way everyone else caught it. At first, when you saw him do it, you might think he was going to drop it, because everyone caught the ball conventionally up here, and now it was down here, and the fans would gasp thinking that he was going to drop it. But it was just a way for Willie to put his own stylistic imprimatur on the way he played the game, but particularly the way he played the outfield, the way he ran, the way he threw, the way he caught. He wanted to be distinctive. He wanted to be like a jazz musician who would create his own unique riffs that would stand him apart from the masses.
How did Mays use his celebrity status to help others?
Willie first used it as a way of helping kids, where he started this really in the Army when he was playing for the team there, and he was living actually outside the base. Everyone knew who Willie Mays was because he had already played a year for the New York Giants. He was the Rookie of the Year. Willie came to understand that his status gave him this cachet. He had money, and so he would just take the kids out and buy them things, whether it was, little things like ice cream and food, or for kids who needed clothes or shoes. Willie was aware of what it was like to be in need of those things. Willie has always been generous to a fault with his friends and with kids, and so he would do things for kids in that fashion. He also had this interesting way about him where he tried to be as colorblind as possible. And one of my favorite stories about Willie was how in the Army he desegregated his black baseball team, but it was a reverse desegregation. Willie played for an all-black semi-pro team on the weekends. But to Willie, race didn't matter. What mattered if you played baseball is could you hit, could you play? And so he would take some of his white Army buddies and bring them on to his black baseball team, and they would play other black teams. And so he integrated that team, and it was quite jarring because then he would take the white players with the team, and they would go into the community after the game and eat dinner at the homes of black families. And to Willie, all that mattered was just what you did. And one quick postscript to that story: a few years ago, someone asked Willie, "Is Major League Baseball ready for an openly gay player?" And Willie said, "Can he hit?" That's all that matters to Willie. It doesn't matter your race, your religion, your sexual orientation, just what kind of player you are, what kind of person you are.
Why did Frank Sinatra apologize to Mays?
Sinatra apologized to Mays because in 1954, Willie was playing a spring training game in Los Angeles, and he and his roommate, Monty Irvin, were there in the Biltmore Hotel, very nice hotel in Los Angeles. One of Willie's cousins, a girl, and one of her girlfriends came to visit Willie at the hotel, and so these two young ladies came up to the hotel room to visit, and the security officers from the hotel came to the room, knocked on the door, and demanded that these two girls leave. Willie explained who he was. He explained who these girls was. She was the cousin, but the security officers said no, that wasn't going to happen. The girls had to leave. Willie said, "Well, would you do this if the girls were white and if I were white?" There was an argument. The upshot was that the two girls had to leave. Willie complained about it to his manager. His manager, Leo Durocher, happened to be friends with Frank Sinatra. Sinatra, who had just won an Academy Award for From Here to Eternity, went to the hotel the next day, raised holy heck with the manager of the hotel, and apologized to Willie Mays.
And why did he never mention these incidents?
Willie never talked about those incidents publicly because he was taught as a young boy that you keep your head down and your mouth shut. If you cause trouble, and we remember Willie, this is the Deep South in the 1930s and 40s. If you were black and you caused trouble, Willie was taught, this is what happened to you. You could be arrested, you could be put in jail, you could be put in a prison camp, you could be shot at, you could be lynched, or your home could be dynamited. Those were the outcomes for blacks in that community at that time. And so, as Willie said to me, I was programmed to keep my mouth shut. So all during the course of Willie's life, to this day, when he has those kinds of incidents where he's victimized by racial discrimination, or someone says something to him that is, racist, Willie will never complain because he's always afraid that if he does, that will somehow come back to hurt him. That Willie has a sense that his own celebrity is very perishable. For all the goodwill that he's built up, if he were to say or do something that would generate controversy, all that would vanish the next day. Willie has never been able to step away from the shadows that he were in fact brought up in the Deep South at that time.
We need to take a short break right now. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Giant rookie Willie Mays ends his batting slump with a bang.
Hi,
My name is Robasine, and I'm the Assistant Director of Admissions here at the Massachusetts School of Law. We have a very hands-on approach to the application process here. Each and every applicant is required to come in and meet with a member of the admissions staff before their application can become complete. The accessibility of the administrative staff, as well as the professors here at MSL, is one of the reasons why I decided to come here. Another advantage that MSL has is the diversity of the student body. As a student, I felt very comfortable on campus because of the diversity of the student body. In the classrooms, the diversity brought lively lectures, fresh new perspectives to the topics that we were covering. MSL is also very committed to student success. Professors hold weekend help sessions, weekend study guide sessions that really deal with time management and how to write essay exams when you're in law school. If you decide to come to MSL, what you're going to get is an institution that is strictly committed to your success as a law student and as an attorney.
Wirtz hammers a terrific drive towards center. It's sailing over Willie Mays' head, but there goes Willie. He turns and makes a miraculous catch just a step short of the bleacher wall with his back to the plate. The catch was almost unbelievable.
Welcome back. James, how did Mickey Mantle and Duke Snyder motivate Willie?
Of course, Snyder, Mantle, and Willie were all playing center field in New York in the 1950s, which is now heralded as the glory days of baseball, because you had these three great teams and great players in the same city at the same time, and there was a friendly rivalry. These are three proud athletes. Mantle and Mays were rookies the same year, 1950. By then, Snyder was already an established star, but each of the three wanted to be known as the best center fielder in New York at the time, and so they pushed each other. And so in that sense, that rivalry, I think, did motivate each one to even excel more than they would have already.
Now everybody has seen or heard about the catch, yet Willie and the batter who hit the ball both say it wasn't even the best play of the game. Can you explain?
Sure. Well, Vic Wirtz was the batter, and this was in the 1954 World Series, the first game. The catch was made in the 8th inning when the game was tied. Then in the 10th inning, Vic Wirtz was at the plate again, and he hits this bullet into left center field on the ground for an extra base hit. Willie ran over, and he had to make a decision. In the Polo Grounds, he could either have played it safely and just run to the fence and gotten it there and held Vic Wirtz to a triple, or he could have taken a risk and tried to cut the ball off before it went to the fence and keep Wirtz to a double. But if he missed the ball and the ball went to the fence, given how deep the Polo Grounds were, how far away the fence was, Wirtz would have had an inside the park home run. Willie decided to try to cut the ball off. He did, made a great backhanded stab and got the ball back into the infield, kept Wirtz at second base. And the reason why both Willie and Vic Wirtz thought it was a better play was because Willie had to calculate that risk-reward benefit and had to make a much more daring play than what he made with the actual catch.
Where does his cousin Loretta say the catch came from?
Loretta grew up in the same house with Willie in Alabama, and when Willie would do his household chores, he made it into kind of a game. Like, when he would sweep the floor, Willie would use the broomstick as a dance partner and would dance around the floor. When Willie washed dishes, he wouldn't just wash them, but he would slide the dishes along the countertop and then run over and lunge and catch it, reaching out for it. Well, the catch that Willie made, he has to lunge and reach out to catch it over his shoulder. His cousin Loretta saw it on TV at the time, and as soon as he saw Willie lunge out and catch the ball, she said, that's just how he lunged to catch those dishes. Mm-hmm. I've seen that catch before.
When did he start stealing bases and why?
He didn't start stealing them really until 1955, after he'd been in the league for several years. And he stole them for the simple reason that the team needed him to do so. Some of the power hitters that the team had either been traded or they had retired or gotten too old. The team wasn't scoring runs as they had early in Willie's career. And Willie said, in order for us to generate more offense, I have to start stealing bases. And that's why he did it.
Why did other players and teammates try to talk him out of stealing?
Because Willie was a power hitter. He hit 51 home runs in 1955. And they said, you can hurt yourself stealing bases. At that time, it was thought, the guys who steal bases were the fast players who maybe hit for high averages, but couldn't hit home runs, couldn't hit extra bases. Their job was to get on base and steal. And really, the fact that Willie did steal bases and was, one of the first players to be a 30-30 guy, hit 30 home runs and steal 30 bases. That was what made Willie so distinctive. He redefined the game of baseball. He was a power hitter who could also lead the league in stolen bases. He was a fast runner who could steal bases but also lead the league in home runs. That had never happened before. He was this perfect fusion between Babe Ruth and Ty Cobb, and that was really, Willie became the benchmark for all other players who followed him in terms of being that five-tool player, the guy who can do it all. And really, that was Willie's contribution to baseball as a player.
Describe the differences between Jackie Robinson and Willie Mays with regard to civil rights.
Well, there are many. Jackie Robinson grew up in Southern California. He went to UCLA, went to college, and he had a very different orientation than Willie in terms of civil rights. Jackie was outspoken. He was angry. He was much more political. And so when the civil rights movement began in force, in the 1950s, Jackie was on the front lines, not just doing what he did on the baseball field, but speaking out. And when Willie Mays came along in the early 50s, Jackie wanted other black players, including the best ones who got the most attention, to also speak out. And Willie wasn't capable of doing it. As I mentioned earlier, Willie thought his job was to keep his mouth closed and to just do what he did on the field. Jackie thought Willie was an Uncle Tom, and he was very bitter toward Willie for not being willing to speak out. And then in the 1960s, after Jackie had retired, and the civil rights movement became more militant, and Jackie himself became angrier and more bitter about things that were going on in the country and things in his own life. Jackie called Willie out on several occasions, said Willie was a do-nothing Negro, said that all Willie cared about was himself, called Willie an Uncle Tom. And this hurt Willie. Willie idolized Jackie because he knew what Jackie had done for all black players, including himself. As Willie liked to say, every time I think of Jackie Robinson, I look at my wallet, because what Jackie did, put money in the wallets of all these black players. And so these attacks on Willie really hurt him personally. And finally, in 1968, after Jackie had spoken out against Willie, Jackie held a press conference in spring training, and for the first time really defended himself and talked about how he didn't criticize Jackie. He would never criticize another player, but he said, I've done it the way that I think fit my personality. By playing the game the way I played it, I paved the road for other black players. Other black players who can now go into country clubs or live in neighborhoods or do other things, go into restaurants, go into hotels. I was able to do it first, and now they followed me, and in that way I think I've made a contribution.
What about his own teammates? Were there any tensions on the team, or what was the team chemistry like?
Willie played for 24 years, so over that time period, yes, there were tensions. There were racists on the Giants, and I write about some of the experiences where Willie's teammates made racist comments toward him. So it wasn't all, sun and roses, but for the most part, Willie's teammates recognized first that Willie was a good guy who would never, who was a leader both on and off the field. But more importantly, Willie was the best player on the team, the best player in the league, maybe the best player ever, and so they were very much devoted to Willie because they recognized he helped them win. He put money in their pockets. He helped them win championships, and so for that reason, for the most part, the relationship between Willie and his teammates was good.
You brought up Leo Durocher earlier. Why was it when Durocher called Mays to tell him that he wouldn't manage anymore? Why did Mays call that his saddest moment in baseball?
Willie saw Leo as his father, not just his father figure, but really as his father, because you know, Durocher was this baseball lifer. He was an intense, wonderfully profane, chronically sort of a chronic womanizer. People hated him because he started fights. He was just this very colorful figure who seemed to be diametrically opposite of Willie Mays in every way. But Leo recognized that Willie Mays was this very young, insecure kid who needed unconditional love, and Durocher gave that to Willie, and it was one of the great partnerships of all time. Had Willie had a less understanding and less forgiving manager, Willie, who got off to a terrible start when he was a rookie, another manager may have given up on Willie, may have sent him back to the minor leagues. And in that era, not every black player got a second chance. It may have been very difficult for Willie to have gotten another chance at the major leagues. So Willie recognized that Leo was not just a great friend and father figure, but what he did for Willie's career. And so when Leo finally was basically fired from the Giants at the end of the 1955 season, Willie said that was his saddest day in baseball.
How was his relationship with future managers or subsequent managers?
It was some good, some not so good. Willie always expected special treatment because he was a special player and he wanted to have control of his own schedule. He wanted to have control of the field when he was playing. The most enlightened managers that Willie had, particularly those who had played with Willie, such as Alvin Dark, they understood, give Willie as much free rein as possible. There were other managers, though, who wanted to treat Willie like the other players, and Willie bristled at that. And they didn't have nearly as good relationships with Willie as those other managers did.
What kind of trouble did Willie have buying a house in San Francisco?
The Giants moved to San Francisco in 1958. Willie and his wife tried to buy a home in a very nice area of the city called the Forest Hills section. No black family had ever moved there before. The builder refused to sell it to him. The builder, who turned out to be a fairly sympathetic figure in the story, said that he had been threatened by other neighbors, by other realtors, by others in the community. If you sell this house to a black man, it's going to ruin the property values of all the homes in the neighborhood. Ultimately, the issue made it into the news, front page, not just of the San Francisco newspapers, but across the country. It was a huge embarrassment to San Francisco because San Francisco had this image of tolerance and sophistication. Bringing a major league team to San Francisco was San Francisco's message that we're now a big league city. And here they bring this team out and they won't allow the best player on the team to buy a house in a white neighborhood. So it sullied the image and reputation of San Francisco. Ultimately, the builder, backed down, sold the house to Willie and his wife. Willie moved in there. Needless to say, property values did not go down. And in fact, on the tour buses in San Francisco, they would specifically drive to the neighborhood and drive past Willie's house because it was so valuable.
Explain what the Barnstorming League was.
The Barnstormers were a team of professional baseball players from the major leagues who would play in games in the Deep South, primarily in the off season, and they would play games typically against other black players from the Negro leagues down there. The Barnstormers were black professional players from the major leagues, and so Willie was a Barnstormer for a number of years in the 50s and early 60s, and it was important because first it allowed Willie to make money in the off season. This was at a time when professional players had to find some other job in the off season. They would work in a hardware store, they'd work in a restaurant, because they didn't make that much money playing professional baseball. But it was significant also in kind of Willie's baseball career in that Willie now got to play in front of fans in Florida and Texas and South Carolina and Southern California where fans otherwise couldn't see him play. So it extended the Willie Mays brand name. And I think what was also kind of neat about it was that in 1955, Willie probably played on the greatest team in the history of baseball. Willie played on a team that had 4 future Hall of Famers just in the outfield itself: Willie Mays, Hank Aaron, Larry Doby, and Monty Irvin. There was also other great players on it like Roy Campanella and Don Newcomb. And so this team played in the Barnstorming League. They won 28 straight games. Granted, they weren't playing other major league caliber teams, but no team would have ever beaten this ball club. And there are great stories surrounding those Barnstorming days.
Did it affect his Major League Baseball play?
It only affected it in that it tired him out, because Willie just played baseball nonstop. And I think that did have a cumulative effect on Willie, particularly later in his career, where he did suffer these exhaustion spells where he would collapse on the field and had to be hospitalized. Willie didn't just play a lot, but he only played one way, all out. It didn't matter if he was playing in a spring training game, for a Barnstorming League, whatever. Willie would crash into walls, run over catchers, dive for balls, and that did have a cumulative effect on Willie's health.
Mays once hit 4 home runs in one game, a game that he called one of his greatest. What was even more interesting about that game?
He wasn't even going to play that game. The night before, he ate these spare ribs and got sick. He was up all night vomiting, and he had to get medical attention. And he came to the ballpark that day. This was in Milwaukee, and he was going to take the day off. But then his manager encouraged him, well, just take batting practice and see how you feel. So he took batting practice, and he got some good hits, and Willie said, oh, okay, I'll play. And sure enough, it was the greatest offensive day of his career, 4 home runs. And there's this great scene of him in the locker room afterwards, and he's being interviewed, and they have a spread of food for all the players, the post-game meal. And sure enough, they're feeding him spare ribs. So what comes around goes around.
Now, what record does Mays hold that in all likelihood will never be broken? And why is it so remarkable?
Willie hit at least 1 home run in every inning from inning 1 to inning 16. So not just 1 through 9, but innings 10, 11, 12, etc. No player is ever going to break this record, because how many players even get a base hit from innings 10 through 16, let alone get a home run in all those innings. And while it's an obscure record, I think it does say something important about Willie. It speaks to his longevity, that he played long enough to be in those many games. The fact that he was a great power hitter, and he was a great clutch hitter. Getting a home run in extra innings, that would usually win the game. I think Willie is proud of all of those attributes of his baseball skills.
You write about many of these feats, and having not seen him play, I was just amazed at what he can do, to the point where I actually think he's probably the greatest ball player of all time. Which of his feats do you find most impressive?
It's a tough one to answer, because really Willie's greatness is not defined by his numbers. It's really the plays that he made, the way that he did things so distinctively. Just two quick examples. There was a play in which he was on. He was in the outfield. Hank Aaron was on first base. The hitter hits his deep drive into right center field toward the wall. Willie sprints to the wall, makes a catch over his shoulder, catches the ball. Hank Aaron had rounded second base, thinking it was going to be a hit. He sees the ball caught. He turns around. He runs back to first. Willie spins around in order to try to double up Aaron. He throws the ball back into the infield, but instead of throwing it to first base, he throws it to second base. And the second baseman, Tito Fuentes, is there. Willie motions to Fuentes, touch the bag on second base. So Fuentes gets the ball, touches the bag, and the umpire calls Hank Aaron out. Aaron had missed second base on his way back to first base. After the game, the reporters come up to Willie and say, how could you have seen that? Your back was to the infield when you caught the ball. How could you have seen Aaron miss second base? Willie says, I know the way he runs. And so he just had this sixth sense about him. And there are plays like this, and one other great play that he made that again speaks to these unique skills. Willie was on second base in an extra inning game. There was one out. There's a ground ball to the third baseman. Willie runs to third. If he runs fast, he makes it to third base without a play. The third baseman throws it to first to get the out. But instead, Willie slows down. The third baseman, Tim Foley, sees Willie out of the corner of his eye. He thinks he can get Willie out by tagging him. So instead of throwing it to first, he lunges for Willie. Willie eludes the tag, makes it into third base safely. So now instead of man on third and 2 outs, it's first and third and 1 out. Then the next batter hits a fly ball to right field. Willie tags up and scores the winning run. So that's a play that shows Willie's skill, his agility, his speed, but also how quickly he thinks about the game as he's running and kind of weighing the risk-reward calculus of making these kinds of plays. It's a play that never appears in the box score, but it wins the game. It's a game that Babe Ruth could have never even conceived of. And one more thing, Willie was 40 years old when he did it. A reminder that Willie was a tremendous player even in the latter part of his career.
What about the game where he almost threw for a cycle? Threw, not hit, threw for a cycle.
That's right. He threw runners out at first, second, and home, and then he would have gotten the guy out in third, but the third baseman dropped the ball. So yeah, they invented a new term. He threw for the cycle almost. Explain
what A Man Named Mays was and why Birmingham blacked it out.
That was a documentary made of Willie Mays in 1963. It turned out to be a full-hour documentary that appeared on NBC. That in itself was unprecedented. At that time, documentaries were considered the stuff of serious news, about politics and world affairs. The notion that you have a documentary about a baseball player, let alone a black baseball player, was unheard of. But this filmmaker decided to do it, and it did appear, and the timing of it was extremely relevant. It appeared in October of 1963, a couple weeks after the Birmingham church bombing that occurred, one of the most infamous events of the civil rights movement, where a black church was bombed that killed 4 black girls. And so the entire country, in particular Birmingham, was on edge because it appeared that we were having, it didn't appear, but we were having this civil war in the country over civil rights. When the documentary was shown, it was blacked out by the NBC affiliate in Birmingham because the city fathers in Birmingham could not abide the possibility that you would have this television show showing this thoughtful, handsome, successful, moderate black man, Willie Mays, who was enormously popular among people of all backgrounds and all races. That was considered threatening to the white supremacists who ran Birmingham, so it was blacked out at that time.
How did Willie become known as the peacemaker, and is it a title he was proud of?
Very much so. In a couple of incidents in Willie's career, Willie broke up fights on the field. The most famous one being one of the most well-known brawls in the history of baseball. 1965, Juan Marichal takes a bat and tries to club the Los Angeles Dodger catcher Johnny Roseboro. This happened during an August game. Both benches come out. Johnny Roseboro because he got hit by the bat from Marichal, he's bleeding profusely on his uniform. Willie Mays comes out. Willie's first fear is that the fans are going to come onto the field and there's going to be a riot on the field in Candlestick Park. Willie knows, and instead of players trying to defuse the fight, because what happened on the field was so violent, the fight is escalating and the players are increasing the fights. Willie knows that for this fight to be diffused, he has to get Johnny Roseboro off the field. Roseboro is running around, trying to get back at Marischal or any other giant. Willie grabs Roseboro and drags him off the field. There's a great picture in the book of Willie pulling Roseboro off the field. Blood is streaming down Roseboro's face. Blood is now all over Willie's uniform. Willie takes Roseboro into the Dodger dugout, sits him down, takes a towel, and begins mopping off the blood off of Roseboro's face. There's a TV camera there, scans and shows Willie doing this, and there's a tear in Willie's eye. After the game, the sports writers write these stories celebrating Willie as the peacemaker for stopping this fight. Writers are saying he deserves a Nobel Prize. They say they should send him to Vietnam to defuse that war. But someone asked Willie, why were you crying at that moment? And Willie just says, well, I was just so sad. And what the comment indicates is that, to Willie, baseball was his family. Not just players on his team and the manager and the front office, but all the players. The other team, the other players, the umpires, the other managers, this was his family. And to have his family fighting each other like that, moved Willie to such an extent that it brought him to tears, and everyone saw what that meant to him by that tear, by seeing that tear in his eye.
You mentioned a statistic in the book which I found also remarkable, in addition to all the others. In 1972, Willie Mays was 41 years old, and he was older than every National League park except for Wrigley Field. Wow. What's the significance at that era? In that era, like how great was that actually?
Well, to Willie, the significance is this, and to the rest of us. If you ask Willie what he is proudest of in his baseball career, he'll say first, signing his first contract, just knowing that he could get to the major leagues. But beyond that, it's the fact that he did play from 1951 to 1973, and he always says, well, I came in the league with a 32-inch waist, and I left the league with a 32-inch waist. Willie is proud of the fact that he took care of his body. He got his rest. He didn't smoke. He didn't drink. He avoided scandal. He didn't, prowl the nightclubs at night. It's the longevity is what Willie is most proud of. He's always said he didn't play for the records. In fact, he has this quip where he says, well, if I known how important records were, I would have gone for them. And so, the fact that he did reach a point in his career where he was older than most of the ballparks, it's important to him because, he played and he showed up. Oh, and by the way, he still holds the record to this day, most consecutive years playing at least 150 games. I believe it's 11 years. And so, not just that he played, but once the season started, he always answered the bell. That's what Willie's proudest of.
And last question, is he doing okay today? How's he doing today?
Well, he's 79 now, and his health is good with one exception. He has glaucoma, and so his vision is poor, and it's a progressive disease, and so there's a certain poignancy, when you spend time with Willie, and because our image of Willie is this great athlete with tremendous ability in all of his senses, and now he just can't see the way he once could, and so I feel for him, when I spend time with him, that he's not able to see like he once did, but he does have a good life. He did well financially in his retirement. He's surrounded by people who care about him, people who love him, and as I said at the outset, he's very proud of everything he's done in his life, and I think he's proud that it's now been captured in this volume.
James, thank you very much for joining us. It's a wonderfully researched book. I learned so much, and I want to thank you for being here.
Well, thank you, Holly, for having me.
Till next time, I'm Holly Vietzke for the Massachusetts School of Law.